Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black Literature, Black History. This is Jason Williams, and tonight we're going to get into Zora Neale Hurston's book, A Life in Letters. Now, this is a book of letters put together that were written by Zora Neale Hurston. And this is a very interesting book that I recommend everyone to get because it gives you an insight on Zora Neale Hurston's personality. These are real letters written by her. They don't have the responses to her letters that were sent out, but they sort of come together like a story because you can hear her referring to letters that she received back from the letters that she had given out. And it just gives you a real genuine insight on the time period that she was writing in, and the type of person that she was, and her personality. Because we get to read things by Zora Neale Hurston, and from my viewpoint, before reading these letters, I envisioned her as a very strong, outgoing, outspoken, in-your-face, black power type of person. But from reading these letters, I don't get just that. Like, there is that in her, but then there's another side, and there's some letters that actually make me cringe with the coonery that she put forth. There's a reasoning behind it, but still, it's just, for example, like, let's get into these letters. For example, the first bunch of letters. Well, before we get into that, if you read this book, you have to read the foreword and the biographical information that is given prior to reading these letters. Now, normally I like to skip over that when I'm reading books because there's spoilers in that information, which is written by scholars who aren't really that much concerned about your enjoying the book as much as just understanding the nuances and the intricacies and the time period and the historicism contained within the writing. But with these letters, you have to read the biographical information that's given. That way, when you're reading the letters and who they're addressed to, you understand what's going on. So the first batch of letters, now the letters are in chronological order. However, it just so happens that many of the first letters in this book are written to the same person. And that person is a benefactress that she had. She had more than one benefactress in these letters that you read. But she had a benefactress, which was a white lady, the last name Meyer, who was giving her money so she could pay for her expenses through Barnard College. So her letters to this benefactress, this white lady, they made me cringe because they were very polite and everything, which I was fine with that. However, on more than one of those letters, she signed it, "Your Pickaninny, Zora Neale Hurston." Pickaninny, like, I from what I read from Zora Neale Hurston about, we need to forget about white folks, we need to just write about black people, we can have stories with just us, excluding them. And from the previous video that I did where we read the letter of her rejecting integration and rejecting any help from whites and wanting to have a revolution, saying 100 black people could give their lives overnight fighting in a revolution in which she would give her life, and we could attain freedom overnight. Those were letters that she had written in like the 40s. However, this is in the 20s, but it's just like she signs it, "Your Pickaninny." Now, I understand she was getting money. This woman was paying all of her expenses. So you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. However, to go to the extent where you're signing it, "Your Pickaninny," like, I couldn't see Zora Neale Hurston becoming so comfortable with white folks to be signing letters like that. Now, I went through the book and I highlighted a lot of quotes and things that I wanted to read on this video. However, I did too many, so this video would be too long if I went through all of them. So I may read some, but another thing, like what you get from these letters, and I just want you to know this, and this is what I liked about the letters, is like you can see where her real friendships lied. And she really, and it's clear, it's in the biographical information, and it's in her letters. It's like she really and clearly had a great friendship with Langston Hughes. Her letters to Langston Hughes are just affectionate, they're real, sentimental, and criticizing white folks, criticizing black folks, and criticizing himself. It's all there. And that's a great thing about reading these letters. However, there's two feelings that I get when I read these letters. These letters are personal, and you can see from reading these letters that Zora Neale Hurston did not write these letters for everybody to be reading. Like, these letters weren't written for me to be reading and the general public and anyone who can buy these book of letters to be read. She has personal information in these letters who are the only eyes. And I think she even states this in one of her letters. Like, she said, I'm writing this letter, and the only person who I want to see this letter is you, the person that I'm writing it to. I don't expect anyone else's eyes to see this letter, because she was giving some personal information and she was giving some criticisms of prominent authors during that time period, where she didn't want that harsh criticism that she was given to get back to that person. So you kind of get that feeling when you read these letters, like, man, I shouldn't be reading this. Like, this is her, this is personal stuff. And I even get like some uncomfortable feelings sometimes reading these, because I'm like, man, whoever gave these letters to this person, this is some real serious information. Because you'll hear from older black folks, and during this time period, they used to have these rules, like when you criticize another black person, that was meant for the community itself. It wasn't for the community at large. And black people who broke that rule suffered like harsh consequences. Like, why are you talking about us to the greater community? Like, these conversations are supposed to be between us and resolved between us. They don't need to be hearing about this information. And a lot of that is in these letters that she wrote to Langston Hughes, Allen Locke, W.B. Du Bois, and other prominent black writers during that time period, which is another thing I want to point out. These letters show the community in which she maneuvered. And they're all writers, they're all artists, they're all poets, and most of the letters are about, what about this poetry, what about this book, so-and-so was working on this novel, and so-and-so was working on this novel. Even when she was working with Fannie Hurst, who wrote the book Imitation of Life, she talks about working with her, and then the various novels that she was working on, and the lessons that Fannie Hurst was giving Zora Neale Hurston about writing novels. And these letters show, like, Zora Neale Hurston she was an anthropologist first and foremost, and that's what her studies were in. And she would go around and travel. These letters show all the different travels that she made, collecting stories and folklore and a lot of stuff that she called conjure. And this is important, and it leads to another conversation that she liked to have, that we like to have today. And she said, and I might read a quote from this, she said that black people need to write about our situations, our histories, our narratives first before white folks get a hold of it. And she said that more than once. I have it highlighted more than once. And then she went further on to say, like, there are white people who write things about black culture and about black history. And she said it's fortunate for black people that they get it wrong and twist it all out of shape and out of form, because that'll give us an opportunity to write about it and give out the correct information. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read a few of those quotes. Just a moment. She wrote, African American writers should concentrate on the, quote, fresh material, quote, of working class, jazz-loving, speak-easy-going black culture, quotes, while it is still fresh, quote, or run the risk that white writers would, quote, exploit it until not a drop of vitality remains. So that's creating our own narrative. So that we should concentrate on the fresh material, working class, jazz-loving, speak-easy-going black culture. Now this is the culture that W.B. Du Bois, Alan Locke, and the high-class, educated black people didn't want to be put out into the public, because they had this propaganda where they were just pushing forth the educated and the law-abiding, false, I don't want to say false, but only that part of black culture. They didn't want any of the negative, I don't even want to call it negative, but they didn't want any of this jazz-going, speak-easy-going black culture put out there. So there was a rift between like Alan Locke, W.B. Du Bois, and them versus Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Wallace Thurman. Because Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, and Wallace Thurman, they concentrated on the working class and the majority of black culture. They weren't concerned with pushing forth an image. They were just pushing forth the truth of black culture, which everyone should read their writings, because when you hear about the 1920s and the Harlem Renaissance, you just think of all the jazz and all the dancing and all the clubs and all the high life and the gambling and all of that, but you don't see what black people were really going through, and that is contained in their writings. But let me read some more quotes that she had concerning this creating your own narrative. Here's a quote that she wrote about black people. She had a letter where she was lamenting on the fact that black folks won't stick together and won't support each other. And she wrote here, "We will learn, acquire cohesion, but we will pay dearly for being a slow pupil," which means, like, eventually she believes that black people will get it together and come together and support each other, but there's going to be a price to pay for us waiting so long to do it. And I think that we, right now in 2017, can see the results of that cohesion that we still lack today. But it seems like right now we're starting to more or less get it together. I'm going to read some other quotes, just some interesting quotes. "You see, the Negro is not living his lore to the extent of the Indian. He is not on a reservation, being kept pure. His Negroness is being rubbed off by close contact with white culture." And this is a letter, I believe, to Langston Hughes. You have followed the writings of Dr. Dubois too carefully, and he is a propagandist with all the distorted mind of his kind. He is doing a great service perhaps for his race, but he must use propaganda methods, and those methods never follow actual conditions very accurately. So there you can see that they were concerned with writing about the truth, not about propaganda. Okay, and here's the last quote. It makes me sick to see how these cheap white folks are grabbing our stuff and ruining it. I am almost sick. My one consolation being that they never do it right, and so there is still a chance for us. I would like to know what Rosamond and Gordon are singing. So there you see that, and she not only wrote that to the black writers and the black people at that time. She has another benefactress after Miss Meyer, who she called Godmother, who is the same benefactress that we talked about that Langston Hughes had, Miss Mason. It's the same benefactress, and from this we get the details of the contract that they had with this benefactress, and the contract was everything that you write is mine. Like everything that Zora Neale Hurston wrote under this contract that she had with this benefactress actually belonged to the benefactress. So there are letters where she's trying to sneak out things to certain writers and throwing out things under different names and things that she didn't want the benefactress to actually own, but more or less everything that she wrote during this time period actually belonged to Miss Mason, and that was the contract that Zora Neale Hurston had signed with her. And I believe, that was probably the same contract that Langston Hughes had while he was receiving her money. But Langston Hughes was very secretive about it. In his autobiography, he doesn't even give her name, and he doesn't talk that much about his relationship. However, he does talk about how bad that he felt when he decided to part from her. And Zora Neale Hurston also has some, like the last thing that I quoted, she had some money problems that she requested help from her benefactress, and she said that she was very hurt by the fact that her benefactress wrote, why can't we trust Negroes? And that's another thing that made me cringe, is like these guys were taking these criticisms from these white benefactors as straight insults, so I wonder what these letters. And that was a letter that Zora Neale Hurston wrote to Langston Hughes, where she said, my feelings were hurt about what the benefactress wrote. So I would like to read the other letters that she's receiving from the white people that she writes to, and some of the black ones, but mostly the white ones, just to see what type of criticisms they're just taking in. So. And then there's other letters where Zora Neale Hurston, I read the quote where she kind of criticized W.B. Du Bois. There's letters where she criticized Alan Locke for not being genuine. It seems like Alan Locke has writings and things that distribute, and he doesn't give his take on it until everyone else does, so he makes sure that he's on the winning team. So she says he's not really genuine in his criticism. And then there's a criticism that she has of Langston Hughes' writings. Now, W.B. Du Bois and Alan Locke and the new Negroes, they would criticize his work for being, for not putting the uppity face of black people forward. But she even criticizes some of his work in the Weary Blues as not being like she said, it's too much like coonish and kind of too much cartoonish and too much like overboard with the painting the picture of black culture, and she didn't really appreciate it. However, one thing about that and the Weary Blues and the magazine Fire and all these writings that were done by Wallace Thurman, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Bruce Nugent, and few others, they were distributing these writings just by hand. Zora Neale Hurston is carrying around these magazines, these books, and when she sells it, she writes a letter to Langston Hughes, or she'll write a letter to Wallace Thurman, like, here's your money, like, I sold this, I sold that, I sold this, and I sold that. I gave away this, and I gave away that, and to whom she gave it to, and she sends them their money back. So it's very interesting that they were doing for self and distributing the materials that they wrote. And at the same time, she was recruiting writers for future editions of magazines and books that never came to fruition. However, they're still represented in these letters. So I'm currently in the year 1929 and reading these letters, and I'm currently on a letter written to Langston Hughes. But I recommend that everyone get this book, A Book of Letters by Zora Neale Hurston. Black Literature, Black History, and I'm Jason Williams. Have a nice evening.